Hello and a very, very warm welcome to this special live videocast from our studio here in New York. My name's David Roth from WPP, and it's my pleasure to be guiding you through today's web seminar. If you want to ask a question, and if you're watching this live, that's great, do that now. If not, if you're watching as a pre-record, also feel free to send me an email at the address below and we'll try and answer it for you. We've got an action-packed 60 minutes starting with this. Well, I'm very glad to welcome our first guest, David Sable, the Global CEO of Y&R. David, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
A pleasure. David, the Best Countries study was launched not that many weeks ago at the World Economic Forum in Davos to a lot of critical acclaim. Obviously, you know, when you launch something in Davos, there's a big process that goes on around it. Can you first of all just tell us a little bit about the thought process that went through your mind when you conceived of the whole notion of doing something on country branding?
Great. So let's just talk about country branding first, because I think it's a popular term today, but it's nothing new. So if we go back in time, and if you think about the great civilizations of the past, so Egypt, even back in those days, if you saw a Sphinx, you knew that it came from Egypt. When you saw SPQR around the world, around the known world, or certainly at that time, of what was known in the Roman times, you knew that that was part of the Roman Empire. That was their branding. It was done. It was known. If you thought about the Chinese emperors, again, there were things that they did that were known. So you look at the great civilizations over history, and they all had brands.
Well, indeed. I mean, Napoleon was famous, I suppose, for saying that England was a nation of shopkeepers.
Exactly.
I'm not certain that was a term of endearment at the time.
And Napoleon himself was a brand,
yes,
you know, when you think about it. So this is not a new concept. What we realized, though, was that there were ways to apply commercial branding studies to country branding. And no one had ever really done that before in quite the same way. And we realized that way back in the day, it actually started right after 9/11. We did a series of studies for the city of New York to help them bring back Lower Manhattan. And we also did a couple of other studies. And one of the things that we noticed when we went through this study is that when we looked at the UK, Japan, and France, all who happened to have been in our brand asset valuator, our BAV brand study, because many years ago we just threw them in. We thought it was kind of interesting. And I'll talk about BAV in a second. But we noticed that we could actually look post 9/11, pre 9/11, and say these countries had X amount of great reputation in the United States against a variety of factors. Post 9/11, some were higher, some like France were actually lower. And then we tied in trade to it, and we could show that for example, in the case of France, as reputation dropped, so did exports to the United States.
So in a sense, it correlates with economic activity.
It correlates with economic activity, it correlates with tourism, it correlates with many, many things. So the BAV, which we should just take a second to talk about, is actually quite interesting. Over 1 million consumers have been interviewed, 52,000 brands around the world, 51 countries, 72 different brand metrics, so it's really interesting. And it's over 20 years. And I'm proud to say that I was actually one of the first people to have used it way back when in the day. The very first client we used it on actually was the United States Postal Service, which was pretty interesting.
And that brand's gone through a transition.
Oh my God,
I mean,
yeah,
that was the only way of getting mail to people.
Had they listened to us. But then when we realized we wanted to start applying it specifically to countries, we said we need to expand this, we need other partners.
So does the world really need another ranking?
So we don't look at it as a ranking, because it's not a ranking. It is a database of attributes. From those attributes, you can learn many things. Now, we've pulled out a bunch of rankings because it makes it interesting and makes it understandable. But a country could go in there and look at any number of things and try to understand what attributes are driving what particular parts of their economy, what particular parts of their investment economy, what particular parts even of their social economy, if you will.
Now, you partnered with a number of constituent parts to pull the study together.
We
Just
did.
want to explain a little bit about
Yes.
why, who, and what
Great.
benefit.
Good question. So frankly, it was very important for us. So BAV itself has a reputation over 20 years. We've worked with many universities, with many academics. We're accepted in the investment community. There are investment banks that use our BAV study when they look at mergers and acquisitions, and many others. And we have, over the time, we've put stock information against so we can tell you how brands perform against stock and their attributes, and we know that this is all true. But we felt that the country study was something different. We needed more information. We needed more partners to help us get to the type of information. The first partner we turned to was Wharton. We went to Wharton because Wharton is known, in fact, for their study of countries, for looking at the economic development, economic factors that drive country growth.
So maybe, David, for some of our viewers who are out of the US and don't know who Wharton are.
So
who are Wharton?
it's the Wharton School of Business, part of the University of Pennsylvania. It's one of the best business schools, certainly in the United States, maybe one of the best 10 in the world. It's an incredible school, very, very well known for their academic rigor. And I think in this case, and for their creativity. In this case in particular, I think that they were the right partner for us because this is a specialty of theirs. So they took our study and they helped us with some of the attributes, but then we were able to lay in actual trade information, actual investment information, tourist information, et cetera, so that we could provide very, very serious numbers against the metrics. So it's a metric to a metric. So we have the perceptual metrics. We could add actual economic metrics to them. The second partner we brought in was U.S. News and World Report. And we brought them in for two reasons. One is we wanted a media partner. In the world we live in today, you have to have a media partner. Like, this is content. This is some of the best content you could ever imagine. And again, because we can cut it in so many different ways, every way that we cut it, so the best country for millennial to start their career in, the most powerful country in the world. By the way, not just with tanks and banks, which is one measure of power that's fairly simple, but the most powerful country against a series of metrics are totally different because we have found through this study that power is different than tanks and banks. Power is the sum totality of a number of attributes that include, by the way, social mobility, outreach, entrepreneurship, and other things in a country. So that becomes very interesting. So we needed a partner. U.S. News and World Report made the most sense to us. Why? Because they already had a global ranking they were famous for, which is the universities. It is something that people around the world read, wait for, and look for. And we felt that they were the right partner for us. In fact, they've proved to be the right partner. Their website, which I encourage everybody to go look at, allows you actually to use our data in a very, very dynamic way. But the most interesting part for us is that they take out of the rankings and out of the data, they create new ways of looking at some of this data, new rankings, if you will, and their editors write around them. And so the content around this has become incredible.
And we'll be giving you the URLs of how to go onto the site a little bit later. David, I suppose what would you say was your most intriguing finding from the entire study?
The most intriguing finding, I think, to me, the tanks and banks issue was actually the most, because I think the notion of power and what actually drives power was a revelation. I think it was a revelation to many people. So I think that was, to me, that was the most intriguing. Because I think that we all tend to think of power, again, as sort of as size, as this notion of who's got more guns,
yes, I mean, it's almost,
who's got more money.
The percent of GDP that you spend on your military is very much is your power ranking, I suppose, in the past.
Now, the truth is, if you really think about it, anybody that followed the Cold War and saw what happened when actually everybody went into Russia and found out that all the tanks were rusted and none of the ballistic missiles actually worked, et cetera, would realize that much money that they spent on the GDP actually helped pull the FSU down as opposed to push it up. But you still would think of it as a power measurement. I think most people would. And I think what we've discovered, and you'll hear more about that as you go through the study, that we've discovered that's not. So I think, to me, that was intriguing, and it made the rest of the study resonate for me.
How can we, across the WPP group, how can we use the study? What benefit does it have both for our clients and for new business?
So the benefits are many. I'd say that the first benefit is just if you have those connections, if you have a way to get to the leadership of the country, whatever country you're in, assuming that it's one of the countries we have, in the first wave, we've looked at 60 countries, but we can add any country in. So there's a way in to get to the leadership of your country. There's interesting data here. And I have presented this to prime ministers, to presidents, to foreign ministers, to secretaries of state.
Well, that's a serious door opener.
All around. And I've got to tell you, everybody listens. Everybody pays attention. Everybody. So that in and of itself, I think, is a start. Second is, think about this. If you're in a country and you have a client who wants to take their goods elsewhere. Now, that company, because they're headquartered in your country, has a piece of that country's brand attached to it wherever they go. So wouldn't it be interesting to know what is the power of that country in another country, the country that you're looking to export to? So the amount of learning that one can get from that is spectacular. So we think that becomes a very important aspect for somebody for any company that's looking to export its goods. Look at the country you're looking to export at, understand how that country plays in the country that you're looking at, and I think that gives you tremendous value. And again, another door opener, a lot of leverage. The third is looking the other way. People looking to import into countries. Very often we're approached by companies to say, help us market in X. So you get back to the same thing. So now understand the country that you're going into, understand how your brand plays against that country. So what do you have in your brand that's similar to that country or that adds value to that country based on all this data? And I think that you have tremendous power, tremendous leverage.
Well, it's certainly a very powerful study. It's got amazing press coverage right across the world. We're going to be covering in a few minutes some of the top line findings, then going into the individual country findings.
Well, let's just talk about the press coverage for a second, because I think that's, again, you asked about things that were interesting to me. When we were in Davos, I think one of the great tweets that we saw was from Justin Trudeau, who was so excited about where Canada ranked.
So Justin Trudeau is the new Prime Minister of Canada.
The new Prime Minister of Canada, the new star of Canada. I think GQ thinks he's a great dressed guy too. So can't do better than that, right? So Justin, we saw Angela Merkel. From her account, people were tweeting. So it was interesting, Bibi Netanyahu. So we found that the people paid attention to it. The number of countries that actually took that data, because it was great to be in the world press. It was wonderful. I think we were probably one of the most told stories in the press out of Davos, which was very exciting for us. But I think the fact that we had these just spontaneous tweets coming from the leaders of the world was just fabulous.
Well, you can't ask for a better endorsement than that.
Absolutely not.
David Sable, Global Chief Executive of Y&R, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we now have a good understanding and an overview of how the study first came about, and also I think some sneak highlights of some of the results. Now is a good time to delve deep into understanding exactly the methodology of how the study was constructed so that we can get a good understanding of how that is going to frame the key results. So I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by my second guest, Anna Blender, who is Senior Vice President for BAV. Anna, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Perhaps you can start by giving us a quick overview. I mean, you are the person who's really been responsible for the depth of the study, for the fielding of the study and the analysis of it. Give us a little feel about how you've constructed the study and the sample so that we can understand the implications for the key findings.
Yeah, so like David said before, what we ended up fielding was the largest and most comprehensive study of nation brands ever. And where we started from was our knowledge about brands and how to research and create insights for brands from over 25 years of doing BAV. And what we ended up doing that was a little bit different was this was a truly global study. We asked over 16,000 people from 36 different countries to rate 60 different countries on 75 metrics. So lots of metrics on which to measure brands, lots of different people from lots of different countries representing the entire world. And the way that we decided who to ask we wanted people that knew what they were talking about, but we also wanted the general consumer sense.
So you wanted a split between, I suppose, what the opinion formers of the world and us, the rest of the people.
Exactly, exactly. So we had about a third, just people like us, although I think that we probably fall in a slightly more influencer bucket. We had a group of influencers who are well educated, have above average income, and who pay more attention than most to what's going on in the world. So people that really have a sense for geopolitics and the economy. And then we also asked business decision makers to give us their opinion. So these are the people that are actually making decisions day to day, where to invest money and how to do business globally.
So 3 sort of clear sort of buckets, I suppose, of pools of respondents to draw from.
Exactly.
You also ended up with about 75 sort of key sort of metrics. Tell us a little bit about those metrics and I suppose what umbrella goes underneath or on top of some of those metrics.
Right. So, this was an interesting challenge, right? Because we've had experience measuring brands holistically, right? Everything from a BMW to a Coca-Cola. How do you measure countries? And we started off with those 48 dimensions that we measure in the BEV. And then we talked to experts, in the field of politics and economics and social good. And we ended up with probably closer to 150 or maybe even 200. And we had to scale that down because there's just simply no room. We ended up with 75. And really the 75 cover things like politics, the economic state and policies of countries. Things like physical assets, right? Is there beauty? Is there scenery? Social good. Culture. So we tried to get as many angles as possible.
And what was, I suppose, the spread between the mathematical sort of derivation of those 75 metrics versus, I suppose, a more sort of qualitative feel for what they should be?
Well, so we started off in a pretty qualitative fashion, and we basically asked people to say, is there anything missing based on what you're an expert in, what you really care about? Is there anything missing? And, there were things that we didn't really catch. For example, an attribute called political distance, right? So how distant, is this a country where there's a dictator and then everybody below has barely any power, or is this a country where political power is well distributed globally, right? Things like that didn't necessarily come to mind, but we realized that was actually an important way to measure countries as brands and had an impact.
So from those 75 metrics, I suppose you distill that down to what we talk about, sort of 8 sort of dimensions. What were those dimensions?
Right, so we did what we call factor analysis after we came up with the 75, and those really distilled for us 8 key themes.
So for us non-statisticians, what's factor analysis?
A factor
and
analysis.
Why should we care?
Well, really what, ultimately those 75 dimensions, they're related to one another.
Right.
So what we do is we group things that are similar to isolate the real differences between the different aspects of a brand. So the things that came out were innovation and entrepreneurship, quality of life of a country, global citizenship, right? How much good does it do in the world? Adventure, heritage, which is all about history and culture. Things like power, right? Which is about military might, and business openness. So those were the 8.
I suppose let's take a look at a couple of examples of those 8 dimensions and understand sort of what goes into them. So let's start with sort of innovation and entrepreneurship.
So innovation and entrepreneurship is like it sounds. Actually, innovation and entrepreneurship are 2 of the metrics that go in there. But also things like, does the country have a skilled workforce? Does it have an educated workforce? Is it a country where it's easy to get access to capital to start your own business? Is there transparency there? So if we were to start a business, we know that this is something we can control and keep.
And global citizenship, we keep being told that actually we shouldn't be looking at ourselves as necessarily a citizen of a country. We are all global citizens today.
And that's really about doing good, greater good for the world. So countries that do well on global citizenship are countries that care about human rights, respect property rights, have religious freedom, are considered to be trustworthy, and have gender equality. So things of that nature that really are about the global good.
And adventure and beauty. I suppose a lot of countries might sort of pocket themselves under those types of dimensions?
Yes. So, as a foreshadowing, Brazil is the #1 country for that. So you can imagine it's a place that you want to go, where the people are welcoming. It might have physical beauty. It has fun, friendliness. So a place that you really would like to go on vacation.
So after having got down to those 8, what's the model then to really get to the rankings?
So this is, we did this with US News and World Report, a rankings expert, and their motto is the best, right? So in this case, we had to know what is the best country, right? So we needed to understand how do those metrics really come together to form a country that's considered best, and what's the definition of best? So from the get-go, we were really motivated by this idea that branding is really important for driving financial outcomes, whether it's a corporation or a country. So we wanted to show in our rankings that countries that were doing the best job of creating prosperity for their people are the ones that should be rewarded. So we correlated those 8 metrics to per capita GDP, and we figured out which one had the strongest relationship and which one had the weakest relationship. And the metrics that had the strongest relationship, we wanted to count those more because we wanted to give that credit to the countries that were doing a good job of creating
So in a sense,
prosperity.
those metrics are core drivers of a nation's prosperity as measured by GDP.
Exactly.
Right. Well, you're watching this live webcast from New York, looking at the Best Countries study, and I'm with Anna, and we're looking at now at delving into the key results. So what do we find, actually, what does make up the attributes of a best country?
Yeah. So I think we foreshadowed this a little bit before, but there were 3 of those 8 key dimensions that came out as most important. And those were innovation and entrepreneurship, global citizenship, and quality of life. So what we think of as a bit more of a soft power metrics. And what was interesting is that traditionally we think of things like power and influence and having a strong military as being extremely important. Those things turn out to be much less important, right? So altogether, as part of our index, almost 60% was weighted on the quality of life and the citizenship and the innovation.
Was that a surprise to you? I mean, going into the study, did you think that would be the outcome, or did you think those sort of harder power measures would be significantly more important?
I mean, I'll be honest, I was sort of hoping the softer power would win out just because, that's the way you want the world to go. But I was a bit surprised because ultimately we are looking at financial outcomes, and, we tend to think that things like, investing in the environment, it's a very long-term investment. It's not necessarily for the short term. What these findings are saying is that if you focus on that, you could actually get results short term. So if an administration really wants to leave a great legacy and do it quickly, it's much more productive to actually focus on those bigger things like the quality of life and like citizenship.
Well, David Sable talked earlier on in the broadcast about the fact that this, in a sense, wasn't just a ranking. There are many things that you can do with the data. And you've looked at something quite interesting in terms of other cuts of the data. First one being this whole notion of a glass nation. What is a glass nation?
Yeah. Well, like it sounds, it's all about transparency. And the great thing about this data is, we had 75 metrics altogether. We asked over 16,000 people their opinions on countries. So there's so many different ways to cut it, and we can create kind of our own indices. And in this case, we wanted to look at what are the countries that were really the most transparent. So what went into it was transparent government practices, being trustworthy, and being not corrupt. And this was according to the general population overall. Denmark, Canada, Sweden. You'll see a lot of similar countries popping up on metrics like this that really came out on top. But it's really a country that you trust to do what it says it's doing. And that's something that's more and more important. We find both in corporate world and in the world of nations.
We're kept being told that millennials are changing the world, changing how we as marketeers need to approach brand building. Millennials are quite interested in your study too, aren't they?
Yeah, so we're actually going to talk a little bit about this more when we get into the regional findings for Asia, but interestingly, China, according to our study, is actually the #1 place to start a career. And how did we come about with this result? We looked at the world according to millennials. That's how we cut the data. And we looked at where are they most likely to see a good job market, economic opportunity. And China came out as #1.
So these, in a sense, are millennials outside of China, thinking that China is a best place for them to start and develop their
this
career.
is global. Exactly. So if China wants to attract millennials, it's in a good position to do that. But it also says that companies that want to attract millennials should probably be in China.
So what do we see, Anna, when we look at brands versus countries and the relationships between the two of those?
Yeah. Well, this we've been studying for about 25 years as part of the BV, right? We've looked at countries as brands, we've looked at people as brands, and what's really interesting is how relevant that comparison is today, because we're seeing, for example, that, in the US, Colgate, UPS, and Amazon are more trusted than Brand USA.
I'm not sure whether it's a good or a bad thing, actually.
Yeah, it's because people are trying to understand the things that they were relying on their government for once, they might now be relying on the the private sector. Same thing in the UK. Richard Branson's considered more of a leader than Brand UK. So it's becoming more and more relevant for countries to think of themselves as brands and to work on those things that they once probably took for granted in the the eyes of people.
And in your view, are countries beginning to understand that?
I think so, but slowly. And so that was one of the reasons for the rankings, to demonstrate that it is something that's important, it has financial implications, and it has implications for the well-being of their citizens.
Well, as we heard from David Sable, the study got a lot of coverage at its launch at Davos. A lot of world leaders were tweeting about it at launch and subsequently as well. And we also see that one of the USA's most premier comedians was also very intrigued at the study, and he used the study as one of the entrees to his shows. So let's take a review of that, and through the eyes of Jimmy Kimmel, let's also then look at the top 20 best countries.
Many important topics to cover tonight, not the least of which is something called the Best Countries Report. This is a ranking of all the top countries in the world. It's determined by a group that includes the Wharton School of Business and U.S. News & World Report. They released their findings at the World Economic Forum in Switzerland today, and according to them, the best country in the world is... Anyone?
Well, Germany number one. Is that a surprise, Anna?
To me, not really. I think that Germany, under the leadership of Angela Merkel, has done a really great job of being a leader, but also doing so in a way that was socially responsible and progressive. And they are the top country for innovation and entrepreneurship, according to the world.
And any other surprises on that top 20? I'm surprised there are quite a lot of sort of Scandinavian countries who you wouldn't necessarily view as best countries across the world?
Yeah, and I think that speaks to the fact that those countries really are leading the charge in terms of quality of life and global citizenship, at least in that the world is giving them that credit. I think there are a lot of other countries that are also doing a great job in the arena, but they're not getting that credit, right? And that's where the importance of being loud and proud about it kind of comes in, and working together to, what we would say, change the world. But it's, it's really interesting for us Americans. Canada came in number 2. It's a challenge, right? You have to make America great again, as some people say. But I think that there really is a lot to learn from the Scandinavian countries, because they're really leaning into leadership in a new light, right? Not necessarily investing in military, instead investing in things like recycling programs and green living.
We've seen a lot of press pickup of that top 20. What were your personal highlights?
Well, the Jimmy Kimmel for me was definitely number 1. I'm a huge fan, but I think that in general, the fact that the New York Times here in the U.S. picked it up, there were quite a few papers in China that did. BuzzFeed in Canada, turned it into a list. So I think that altogether, I was mind-boggled, but we had over 44 million eyeballs on the launch. So it just goes to show that people really care about this stuff, and people want the world to be, they wanted the place they live to be number 1, but they also want to learn from each other to try to understand how to make things better.
So, good sort of segue into having a look at some of the additional rankings that have been created with the data. And we're going to give you, at the end of the broadcast, ways where you can take a look at the data, and ways where Anna and her team can also help you navigate your way through the data with potential clients. So let's first of all look at the citizenship ranking.
Yes.
First of all, what is it, and why does Sweden come up in top?
Yeah. Well, so citizenship is one of the sub-rankings. It was 19% of the index that we created because it correlates so highly with per capita GDP. And I think that I'm not very surprised, that Sweden makes the top of the list. It's one of the countries that has a negative waste, right? They actually import garbage from other countries and recycle it. And what's interesting, we did an interview with the embassy in the U.S. of Sweden, and the ambassador talked about the fact that this is one of those things where this is something they truly believe in, but they want the world to be a collaborative place where people come in and learn from Sweden about how to live in that way, right? And we're hoping that the rankings start that kind of conversation.
And power and influence, I suppose you would have thought that the usual suspects would come up top, and power and influence, and indeed they do. United States number 1, Russia number 2.
Right. I mean, it's a little bit reminiscent of a Cold War ranking, right? Things have not changed too much. You've got US, Russia, Germany, UK, all the countries that have been involved in wars. And I think that speaks to the fact that in some ways we are still living in a very similar world that once was. And, it's 8% of the index, so it's something that's significant. But I think that had we done this 25 years ago, it probably would have been skewed a lot more towards.
Okay, and I suppose the romance in me wants the adventure and beauty rankings to be quite interesting, and indeed they are.
Yeah. I mean, this is the fun one, right?
Yeah.
This is, where should I go travel next? Everybody wants to go to Brazil, followed by Italy, followed by Spain. Costa Rica, Portugal makes the list. This is a fun one. I mean, the unfortunate thing for countries, though, that are really reliant on travel as an industry is that while it's sustainable, it's not necessarily an engine of growth. Right, so a lot of countries are really resting on their laurels, not investing in certain things like innovation and entrepreneurship to really propel growth and financial performance going forward.
But I suppose, in a sense, going back to the way in which you cut the data about forward-looking things versus historical-looking things, this was what a lot of countries fell back on in terms of their GDP growth.
Yeah, exactly. And now with, for example, the Zika virus impacting Brazil, that's something that has long-term implications. And it's a good thing that Brazil has also made some of our lists in terms of places to invest and innovation, and kind of seeing that delta going forward. So I think they're in a good spot, but just relying on adventure is not enough.
Okay, best countries for women.
Yeah, so this one is
why and have you created that? Again, we see the Scandinavian countries coming up top. So.
Right. So Denmark, again, is number 1 here. And so this is not one of the sub-rankings, but this is just another example of us going into the data, looking for something interesting, and actually in partnership with U.S. News and World Report. So they did an entire series in the month of March around women and cut the data so many different ways. This is actually according to women. Where do they see countries that have the most gender equality, that treat people in the best way, that care about human rights, but also where it's culturally easily accessible. So I do encourage people to go on the website and see a lot of the content around this. I think it just shows how much can be created.
Now, every webcast needs its complicated charts. We've got a
Yes.
couple coming up now. But actually, there's quite an interesting story within that, which is useful for everybody to understand the depth that you can go to into the data
Yeah.
and the analysis you can create. Just explain a little bit about, in a sense, this whole notion of desire versus sort of actual travel history.
Right, so this is where we're kind of going into the how can we use this for consulting. So this is an example of how much people want to go to New Zealand versus how many have actually been, right? You see that New Zealand is kind of one of the farthest. There's so many dreamers that want to get there, but for some reason they just haven't, right? Unlike some other countries like the US, for example. So then the question becomes, how do you turn that desire into reality? And we can use the data and we can use pretty complex analytics to uncover what the drivers are from those 75 dimensions.
And then looking at the scores across the 60 countries, how does that work? And again, what lessons can we learn about the ways that we can start to dissect the data and come up with some very interesting observations and insights that can drive business?
Right, so this is an example of a country where it scores really well on things like heritage and culture and has a lot of attractions to attract tourism, yet it has an issue relative to the other 60 countries with being modern and safe. And we found that that was actually a barrier. So the question becomes, how do you overcome that barrier to drive greater tourism? And because everything is relative to the 60 countries, we can use case studies of countries that are doing it well. Who has done a great job of turning that safety issue into something that's an opportunity.
So this really does start to bring up to the surface of things that governments can, in terms of their overall policy and the way in which they spend money, really can change the dimensions of where their country sits.
Exactly. We can, precisely hone into those 75 dimensions, and they come back to strategy, to policy, to educating the population, how to invest money in the public space. There's a lot that could be done with it. It's really informative.
Now, right at the top of the program, we talked about the notion of actually sort of country brands is nothing new. But what does this study tell us about how country brands are actually seen today?
Yeah, so I think the great thing, the fact that we can tie it back to the BV, helps countries see themselves as marketers, right? So for example, here we see that, in the eyes of the world, the United States is an MTV, a Facebook, and Xbox, right? What does that mean for America, right? It's got this fun, edgy persona. It's kind of a cultural influencer. What does that mean for the way that it should speak to the world? But if it wants to have a more serious message, something a bit more serious than MTV, that might be a bit of a, it has to hone in on a different dimension, right? Same thing with Brazil. It's all about fun. It's the Axe, it's the Fanta of the world, the H&M, the Twitter. There's something maybe a little superficial about that image, right? How do you create something more serious, something that the world can listen to, but also how do you lean into it to create something that's more powerful and compelling?
And we're also seeing that there's a two-way reaction in terms of the country and the brand. Obviously, the country feeds the brand, but we're now seeing actually the other way around. Maybe the brand is starting to have an impact on the country brand.
Yeah, I think that this the relationship between corporate brands from certain countries and the countries themselves is extremely important, right? So you think American Express, for example, it has the word American in it, right? When it goes into China, when it goes into India, what does that actually mean? What are the things that are positive about that image, but what are the things that might be holding American Express back? You think about Lenovo in China. When you say Lenovo, you probably think Italian based on the name, but it's actually a Chinese brand. And so is Lenovo trying to stay away from the image of China? Should China lean into that? How does the relationship between the two work? Volkswagen in Germany is actually an interesting one recently with the scandal. That happened after we fielded our study, and Germany is known as this very trustworthy, transparent, very high-tech, capable country. How does the Volkswagen scandal impact that image?
So let's take a little deep dive now in Asia.
Yeah.
and just see what insights can be derived from around Asia. First of all, just have a look at, so we've taken quite a liberal view about what potentially could be called Asia, but these are the markets that we're going to have a look at. Just
Yeah.
give us a little bit of perspective around that.
Yeah, so, I mean, as you can see, I think that we'll probably have some people from Australia listening to this, and Australia is the number 6 country, followed by Japan, number 7. Beyond that, the top Asian markets that really make the list are Singapore, China, and South Korea. And, there are some that have a ways to go, Pakistan, Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan, if you want to look at them this way. They're a little bit all over the map, but they're definitely power players in the region. So the question is, if you are a company based in those countries, how do you use that to your advantage? If you want to promote yourself globally as a travel destination, as an investment destination, how do you lean into the strengths and use that to your advantage?
And we do see some differences from Asian consumers and opinion formers, their view of Asian countries versus the rest of the world's view of Asian countries.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Singapore is actually a much bigger power player in Asia itself than the outside world, right? So it's number 10. It makes the top 10 list if we're looking just at Asia. So the question is, the Asian region is recognizing that power of the brand. How do we expand that, right, to make sure that the Americas recognize it too?
Yeah, and do you think a lot of countries are, I suppose, in the slower growing economies, are missing the point of how some of these more faster growing economies are really changing and becoming much more powerful in the way in which you've defined what actually does make up a best country?
I mean, I think there's definitely a lot of resting on laurels, right? Countries investing in traditional measures of power as opposed to the forward-looking ones. I think Singapore has done a great job of investing in this idea of innovation and entrepreneurship and being forward-looking, and I think that's really the key right now to what Singapore means to the global community.
Now, it's impossible to look at Asia without looking at China. What do we see with regards to China?
Yeah, well, China's a really interesting one, and we'll see this a little bit more later, but for millennials, I mean, we already saw China's the number 1 place to start a career, but just in general, if we look at the global country rankings according to millennials, China is number 12. It's number 17 according to the general population, so it makes the top 15, right, top 12, which is extremely opportune, right? So again, if you are a Chinese company, right, you're in a really great position to attract millennials. They want to be attracted to you. And if you are a company that's global and you want to attract millennials, go to China, right? This is a place they want to be.
Okay, Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, lots to pick.
Yeah.
What's your views and observations from what you see from the data?
Well, these are countries with a lot of opportunity, but it's not really getting recognized outside of Asia and outside of Middle East and Africa.
Is that an important thing to be seen as recognized in those areas?
I think that for investment opportunities and for tourism, extremely, right? I know Thailand is a great, from the Americas, a lot of people take trips there, but they might not think of it as an investment destination, whereas probably in the Middle East and Africa, it's a lot more likely to be thought of that way. So you're missing opportunities if, one region is seeing the amazing aspects of your brand and are giving you recognition. That means that there's something there that you can market to other areas and really optimize the value of your brand.
So let's have a look at some of the top 10 across Asia. What do you see?
So what we did here was we looked at the countries that actually make it into the top 10 list in the sub-rankings, right? Australia across the top, basically everywhere, missing a little bit of that heritage, right? People are not giving it credit for having the history that Australia does. Japan still has, really known for innovation and entrepreneurship and has significant cultural clout. And New Zealand is really kind of the Nordic of the Pacific Ocean. Singapore, all about the commerce, gets a lot of credit for being open for business, for innovation and entrepreneurship. And then we got a few more in there. China's still about the values and the heritage and the power and the influence. It's not, the millennials are giving it credit, but the rest of the world, there's still work to do. South Korea, I think partially because of the conflict today, gets a lot of power in the world stage for its political influence. And you've got China has the business strategy and the adventure going for it. So it's a place that's really ripe for growth.
But quite a lot of discrimination between country to country. in terms of how they're seen?
Yeah. So each one does have a unique personality, right, and a unique advantage. So understanding what that unique advantage is and going out with that advantage into the world is how you get all the opportunity, but also identifying where the weaknesses are, concentrating on those to really optimize the value of the brand.
Well, we've talked about it before. Let's finally talk about it again in this particular context.
Yeah.
But the power, the influence, and the significance of the way millennials see Asia.
Yeah, I mean, this is extremely powerful for me, right? Knowing that this is a place that they want to start a career, places they want to live, Singapore, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, New Zealand, really outperform among millennials. So I think this is a time for Asia to really lean into that and say, listen, we're open. You want us, we're here. Come, we have great places to work, we have great places to live, and I think that it's extremely important for them to use that to appeal to global corporations, to headquarter their companies there, to look for workers there, and even to brand Asian goods globally.
And to the future?
So the other thing that we found is that a lot of countries in Asia are the ones that perform well in our indices of momentum and places to invest. So this is looking at where are the business decision makers seeing that opportunity, the influencers, right, versus the general public. And we find that the biggest deltas are really in the Asian region. So great place to be.
Well, it's impossible to cover absolutely everything in 60 minutes. We're almost coming to the end of our time. Let's just take a quick look at, in a sense, what our viewers and our WPP colleagues around the world can do with the data, how they can access the data, and how they can get in touch for any more information. First of all, where does the bulk of this data reside, and how can we get access to it?
Right. So, I mean, there are two places, really. First of all, there's a lot of data already publicly available with our partner, which is the Best Countries franchise of U.S. News and World Report. So you can go on the site, you can play around with data visualization. There's lots of information there. Every single country gets an analysis and scores on all the different metrics. There's also the consulting side, where we can actually go in and delve into the data to try to understand what levers different countries, different governments, and different corporations have to improve perceptions and really drive power. And that sits with us at BEB. So probably the best place to start always is the Best Countries site, and just play around and see what you can find there.
And then the second place to go to is Anna. I'm going to give Anna's contact details in a minute. But in terms of, in a sense, those two plays, the government-related conversations and new business opportunities, what, in a sense, does that ground cover?
Yeah, I mean, some of the easier things that we really think about are tourism, right? So we have so much information to help governments, and whether it's country governments or customize something for regional governments to grow the tourism. Investment is a big one, right? How do we demonstrate to the world that we are a place to invest, right? That we're transparent, that we've got a lot of opportunity. But beyond that, general country positioning, helping governments make strategic decisions about policies, helping administrations, leave their mark.
And on the corporate sort of side, I mean, countries as brands transcending markets in order and countries to grow their business. There's a lot of value that this data has for clients and potential clients in this area.
Definitely. I mean, when you think about market entry strategies, which country should we go into? We were talking about before brand provenance. How do we lean into the fact that we're a French brand or a German brand or a Chinese brand? And every country has their kind of corporate twin, right? And partnerships between government and the corporate sector are extremely valuable these days, right? Using each other's strengths to drive both brand and the actual capabilities is going to be really important going forward, and we can help figure out where the synergies lie in that.
And it's not just any one of the disciplines that we cover across the WPP group that will find this information not only interesting but also useful for their clients and to develop their business. It's really right across the whole sort of horizontality of WPP.
Right. I mean, we've worked with so many companies already, from PR agencies, crisis management, creative agencies. There are many ways to collaborate to create a really holistic offering to craft the image of a nation.
Now, in the website, you'll see a whole series of different rankings, but that's only scratching the surface of how you can delve into the to the data and create a whole series of other rankings, other tables, other ways of looking at the data in order to solve problems and create insights.
Yeah. I mean, we've got on the site itself, there are rankings, but there's also, we wrote an ebook as part of the launch. There's so many videos that really go deeper into things and explain what everything means, but also news that's getting updated every single day that's really topical and relevant and based in the data. And data visualization if you want to craft stories of your own. And then once you're done with that and you need more, then you can come to us.
So the site is constantly being added to, both from a sort of a journalistic perspective and also from a data perspective as well. And as Anna said, there are a lot of very interesting videos from opinion formers, business leaders from around the world that again you can gain some insight as to how they see country branding and some of the insights from the study as well. The study's been launched a few months ago. You're already planning, it's a bit like a retailer thinking about Christmas already. You're already planning the 2017 study.
That's right.
And we talked right at the very beginning about the difficulty of getting to those 60 countries. There are opportunities to add additional countries into the mix for 2017. How would that work, Anna?
Right, so we had to limit it to 60 because we have only so much room, and so we created rules around how to qualify. And of course, there are anywhere between 186 to 196 countries in the world, depending on how you look at it. Not every country is going to make the list, but what's great about it is that with the methodology, we can include additional countries that are not going to be later included in the ranking. So we'll have all the same data rated by the same people in 75 dimensions. So if your country's not on the list today of the 60 that qualify, feel free to reach out to me and see, can we slip it in for 2017? There's a fee involved, but you would, for that initial fee, you get access later on to a lot of insights.
And also as part of the personalized publications site on brandze.com, we'll also be adding a whole series of country-specific data to that site, so you can create your own custom reports, and that will be coming soon, and we'll be letting you know when that's available.
Very excited about that.
Anna is the go-to person. These are her details at bav.com. And please feel free to ask Anna and get in contact with her if you need any more further information.
That's right.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, this has been a very fast and furious 60 minutes. I'm afraid our time is now up. On behalf of all of the technical team here from our live webcast from New York, I'd like to say thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed for David Sable, Global CEO of Y&R, for joining us, and to our guest, Anna, who's taken us through some of the results. It's all that remains for me, David Roth from WPP, is to say thank you very much indeed for watching. There is huge value in the best countries data. We're making it as accessible to you as possible to help you understand some of the issues that relates to country branding and brands from countries wanting to go global, to help you in your client work and also to grow and develop new business. Please do contact Anna or myself if you've got any further questions. But from me here live from New York, it's David Roth saying thank you very much indeed for watching.